Our media partner KUNM also covered the proposed SNAP changes this week, and they spoke with Human Services Department spokesperson Matt Kennicott. You can find a link to that story on our website. And now, welcome back to The Line. This week, the Center for Public Integrity released a report on the use of federal dollars by officials at Sandia National Labs to lobby against competition for a new contract. Pat Malone, formerly a reporter at the Santa Fe New Mexican and a guest here on The Line once or twice, was one of the authors of that report. And that report cited a position paper within Sandia that said it was not only in the lab's interest, but in the country's interest, that's a quote, to maintain the existing contractor at the facility. Rob, I'm going to start with you on this one. That quote really just jumped out at me and grabbed me by the face. I can't imagine any taxpayer would agree with that a single source contract is in the best interest. But does this speak to something, did that quote speak to you in some way about the attitude about where Sandia is coming from and why it seemed okay to sort of lobby with federal money and our money to get this contract?
Yeah,
again?
it did jump out at me too. You know, as a free market guy, and I don't know a whole lot about, government contracts within the technological sector, but it just seems to me as a free market guy that, well, why don't we just open this thing up to bidding for everyone, and then you can get the best sort of deal possible. So, and the fact that $500,000 in federal taxpayer money is involved, it does jump out.
Now, Sophie, I can't imagine the problem is wanting to lobby to keep your contract. Nobody could blame these people for that. You want to keep your thing going. A 5-year deal, I think it's a 2-year extension or something after that, about 7 years total. But we're talking about a lot of money flowing through. Like $16 billion all told if it came out that way. Did they overstep in your view because the money was so big?
That's a good question. I think it's not just the money. I think that there is probably some value placed on stability, not having changes in the workplace that would come from having a new provider. But I also, I get the sense here too that there was charitably a real lack of understanding of how that needed to work and the separation that needed to be created. Perhaps less charitably a decision to see how far they could push it over that line. It's unfortunate that they were caught. What strikes me from an Albuquerque perspective is I don't want to see damage happening to the community because of this. And it seems to me that at this point that's not going to happen.
What's the potential damage that you could see possibly from?
At this point we're not seeing unusually large fees or anything like that. I think it's just more Sandia. I would hate to see the federal government move away from Sandia. Let's put it that way. I think that to our community, it's such an important player that we really work hard to preserve. Our Congress people and senators do, et cetera. That I'm just leery of taint.
I hear you. Laura Sanchez-Rivey, Congressperson. The word just came up. Of course, a big part of the story is Congresswoman Heather Wilson. She was involved on contract with part of the lobbying team effort. And I have to say again, I don't think folks would find it necessarily surprising that lobbying our senators and our Congress people, and that's not that big of a deal. We do that all the time on things. But what was the line for you when you look at this? Where was the overstep, if there was one in your view?
Well, so just sort of a point of clarification. So she says, and I think that, this has been in the news before, but what the former Congresswoman says is that she was not part of the lobbying team. And I think your introduction was that she was part of the lobbying team. She actually was hired, according to her and according to Sandia, to provide information, to provide, obviously to advise Sandia on their lobbying, but she wasn't actually lobbying. And I think that she makes that distinction. I think it's a fine line, and I think that any kind of corporation, in this case Lockheed Martin, has a huge interest in having lobbyists and in maintaining their contracts and doing what they can to ensure that and anybody who's in that kind of work, government contracting, knows that that's a part of it. I think the problem we have here is that Sandia also had people on their payroll, which is, my understanding, covered by general operating costs, and that comes from federal dollars, also conducting some form of lobbying. Whether that includes, actually direct lobbying, where you're scheduling trips and going to DC and meeting with members of Congress on specific legislation, or if that means, assembling information for them at request, which it sounds like they did a fair amount of. I think one of the clear fixes on this is for Sandia to, have people designated to do that kind of work, but keep them off of the operating cost books. Make them part of what Lockheed Martin's other source of funding, pay them through that and not through the general operating. It's a fairly simple, I say simple given how complicated the corporation is itself, a simple fix in terms of segregating those funds. And I think they didn't do that. And that is problematic. Now, the Inspector General report said, had several recommendations, to deal with this, and one of them was recovering the costs that they spent, federal monies that they spent in employee pay to these people who engaged in these activities. That's, I think, my understanding is that they did some of that with Congresswoman Wilson's payment as well. And so any contractors or employees who engaged in this activity, within this period of time that the Inspector General report covers, that they be paid back with Lockheed Martin monies or non-federal funds. And this isn't, this issue of the federal acquisition regulations. I know a little bit about the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations, and government contracting at the federal level. This isn't unusual or specific just to Sandia. Anybody, any executive branch agency, any agency out there that gets legislative dollars are prohibited from using those dollars to turn around and influence the legislation or influence members of Congress. It's just inappropriate and it's against policy. So I think, my reading of it is this is sort of a slap on the wrist for Sandia. It's not great. It's a black eye of sorts, but there's a fix, and the fix is to go back to the Inspector General report and do what they're recommending, which is to ensure that there's policy guidance both from DOE and from NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration, on this, and to follow their own policy of not doing this, and then to make sure they segregate out the people who are actually lobbying or conducting that kind of legislative work, and the people who are doing the actual contract specific work.
Right. Senator, on Laura's point, let me read you in part the IG's report. Inspector General Gregory Friedman, this is back in November of last year. In part, he says the use of federal funds to advance that interest, meaning the interest of recognizing Lockheed Martin wants to get this contract, through actions designed to result in a non-competitive contract extension was, in our view, prohibited by Sandia Corporation's contract and federal law and regulations. That seems pretty concrete to me. It seems like there's a very clear line here that if in fact in Sandia's own recommendations of how they conduct their own business, a line was crossed here of some part. Now, they've returned the money to Congresswoman Wilson, as Laura mentioned, but there's still other money hanging out there. What's the fix here in your view? Is there something Sandia needs to do to give us confidence, or is this behemoth so large that it just really doesn't matter at the end of the day? Not to be flip about it, but whether it happens or not, the public's in the same place here. What's your sense of that? Did they have to do anything for our benefit here?
Well, it's a good question, because unfortunately, I think there's a lot of gray areas here. So, for instance, taxpayers look at a sole source contract for billions of dollars. They say there's absolutely no way that should happen.
Right.
However, if there's an original service product, if there's a unique service product or a proprietary service or product, then case can be made that there shouldn't be an RFP. But the default, to clear up all of the gray area, you do an RFP, a request for proposal, around a contract like that. When it comes to lobbying, I mean, we see that in the state of New Mexico. APS lobbies the legislature. Where does the revenue come from? Well, they create revenue streams. The courts lobby the legislature. Governmental entities are lobbying the legislature. Where does the money come from? On the federal level, it's the same issue. So governmental entities do lobby, and the question is where's the money come from? And in each case, we have a different answer.
Right.
As far as Congresswoman Wilson, I think it's all about connections. In other words, where
It's a very New Mexico thing to say, by the way. You're getting right to the nut of how we operate here. It's about connections, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but the question is, the slippery slope in the gray areas, did one have connections prior to going to Congress? So you have a retired military general, for instance, who has lobbied Congress, who knows Congress people, who has connections. He runs for Congress, gets elected, and then he leaves.
Right.
Okay, is he able to lobby Congress? Well, I would say if he already had those connections and he wants to go into the private sector and renew those connections, that's one thing. But if all the connections you had as a congressman or even as a state legislator, I introduced bills to prohibit lobbying for 2 years. from people who left the legislature, because I thought, okay, most of our connections come from the position, and you can't use the position for personal gain. But in the case of this general, or a general contractor, or an engineer who had the contacts before, they're in and out of Congress, should it be prohibitive for them to lobby the federal government? And I think the answer is, I think we need to create clear law and guidance around that, with some exceptions for people like this general.
Right.
The reason why we haven't been able to get things like that passed in Santa Fe and in Washington is because they focus on that exception and not the rule.
Gotcha.
So the rule should be a prohibition with certain exceptions. I think that's the solution.
Let me sneak out another quick 30 seconds here. We're a bit over on time, but Sophie mentioned something I do want to touch on. Rob, let me go to you on this. I have to imagine that this, in the idea of this new contract coming up in just a little bit of time now, the decision, this does not bode well for Lockheed Martin. I can't imagine the folks making this decision going to go, oh, we're all good now, everything, they've given the money back, you know, we're going to start fresh. So then what happens? Are we looking at a post-Lockheed Martin universe here with Sandia potentially, because of this situation?
I don't know, because I mean, the story has legs, and I think what makes it really credible is that there's an IG report out there about this. This isn't like disgruntled employees where it came out and were generating this story. But on the other hand, I don't know how many other people are qualified besides Lockheed Martin. Which in that case, that brings up the question, why even lobby it to begin with?
Right. If you're up against like Bechtel or something, it's only one or two other players out there. Interesting. Let's see how this plays out. Up next, we talk about efforts to address the wage gap between men and women here in Albuquerque.